And today we're going to do sort of a prophecy update potpourri titled When You See. We talk each week about the convergence of events, and I will confess to you that yesterday I was sort of sitting at my computer and Pam said, "What are you working on?" And I'm like, well, I don't know if I have anything to talk about. And then I answered the phone. Somebody called and I answered the phone, and I checked my email about 2 a.m. And so again, I was one of those fire drills to try to get everything in place to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit more this week about what we talked about this week, these passages in Zechariah, particularly in Zechariah 12, where it says that God will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. And Jerusalem has always been at the center of the Jewish people. And I'm going to apologize if that's not the right reference. I think I have the reference right. But at the time of Solomon, this is what was written in 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. Since the day that I brought forth my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city among all the tribes of Israel to build a house in, that my name might be there. Neither chose I any man to be a ruler over my people Israel. But I have chosen Israel, that my name might be there, and have chosen David to be over my people Israel. And so God put his stamp on the city of Jerusalem. And we know that when that started 3,000 years ago, when David took over the Jebusite city that was there and moved his capital from Hebron, about 25 miles to the south, to Jerusalem, Jerusalem has become the heart and soul of the Jewish people. And you see a lot of evidence of that in what they write and what they say. And always that statement that they would say at one of their feasts, next year where? In Jerusalem. And after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the diaspora occurred in 70 AD, for 1900 years roughly, that promise was what kept the Jewish people in many respects united. Now look, we know from the scriptures, from the prophets, from Chronicles, from Kings, from Samuel, and from Judges, and from Exodus, and from Numbers, and from the whole history of the Old Testament. Let's just sum it up. And I noticed I was going backwards, and that the Jewish people did not live very often according to God's rules. And in 1 Corinthians, we're told that we are given these stories, the historical stories of what they did and the abominations that they committed are given to us as examples so that we should not repeat them. So there is a spiritual lesson in the stories that we read about. But the one thing we also know is that God stayed faithful to his people, and that he says that in the end times he will reach into the nations, Ezekiel chapter 35 and 36. I'm going to reach into the nations. We're going to draw you back. I'm going to bring you back into the land. And I'm not going to do it because you deserve it. I'm going to do it because my name is at stake. I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. And a lot of the end-time prophecies that we talk about really don't make sense unless you have the Jewish people, or at least a large portion of them, back in the land with a Jewish state called Israel. So I know that the Jewish state of Israel is not perfect. I don't agree with everything they do. You can go there and you can see that it's an extremely divided land, even among the Jewish people, with the different sects of Orthodoxy and the different sects of Judaism and the secular people, the humanists, the The atheists, there's a huge component of atheists. There's a very high abortion rate there, maybe as high as any place in the Western world. Tel Aviv has a licentious sexual freedom aspect to it that makes you very uncomfortable. But God says, I'm going to, so the fact that God reached out to them when they didn't deserve it shouldn't surprise us as Christians, because how many of us really deserved the grace that God has showed us through the gift of his Son, whose arrival we celebrate? And by the way, there's a lot of arguments back and forth. Should we celebrate Christmas? Should we not celebrate Christmas? Listen, I think we should commemorate the birth of Messiah because it was fulfilled. It was the fulfillment of many, many Old Testament prophecies. And it set in motion God's perfect salvation plan that was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So let's just talk about a few things that's going on. This is the Federal Bureau of Injustice, Department of Injustice, Federal Bureau of Inclination. I'm not going to make a lot of comments about this because I could go on for quite some time. It's really, in my judgment, it's kind of out of control. They probably ought to shut this thing down. But everybody says, well, let's say they get Trump, they'll stop when they get Trump, right? No. I mean, this is from the Atlantic this week. And I want you to know that for everything they say about Donald Trump and harassing women, which is one of the current things that they're doing. Now, I don't know. I can't judge those things. They're very difficult to judge, even when you're in a court of law, and I'm a lawyer. I will know. I saw there was one woman who got on, and it was just terrible that she'd been harassed by Donald Trump. And what did he do? Well, I was a contestant in a Miss USA beauty pageant, and Donald Trump came back there while we were getting our makeup on, and I was in my bathrobe, and I didn't like the way he looked at me. Now, I don't think she had any. Now, listen. She was going to get on stage in a bathing suit and walk around in front of the world. And so I'm just saying that some of these claims don't pass the smell test. They don't hold water, whatever you want to say. But so Trump is a woman hater. But they say the same thing about Mike Pence. Why? Because he won't go out with a woman, not his wife, unless somebody else is along or somebody else is there. And what do they say about him? He hates women. So I guess what they're going to say about anybody they don't agree with is they're a hater, you're an Islamophobe, you're a hater, you're a bigot, you're a racist. It's the usual thing. So it's not this coarseness in our political discourse is not going to change, regardless of who is there. This was from the front page of one of the British newspapers, I think the Guardian or the Telegraph. It said this: faith schools teach beliefs that clash with British values. Inspectors need new powers to tackle conservative faith schools that are spreading beliefs that clash with British values, an Ofsted report will say today. Ultra-religious schools are teaching children in a way, and I'd love to know what they think is an ultra-religious school. That's probably a school that actually lets the kids read the Bible. That's probably what they call ultra-religious. In a way that threatens to undermine principles of tolerance and respect, the school inspectorate's annual report says. So we want to be tolerant. That's why we need to get rid of you Christians who don't agree with us. It's incoherent, it's hateful, and it's wrong. Ofsted found that the proportion of independent schools judged inadequate or required improvement increased this year from 31 to 40%. Many were highly conservative Christian, Jewish, or Muslim faith schools. It's just stunning. Now, there's this thing called Bitcoin. And it's gone. I mean, you could get it for a pretty good price. You could even invest and get a Bitcoin for $1,000, and it's gone up to close to $20,000. It's dropped back to about 16, and nobody knows who's really in charge of it. They claim that it's highly secure, it can't be hacked. You can buy it, but another way that you can get it is you can do these computing problems on a computer and qualify for a Bitcoin. And these are very complex problems that require a lot of computing power. And what they're finding, though, is that there's a social cost to that can, so everybody's real excited about Bitcoin, but these computers run on electricity, right? And electricity has to come from power plants, and power plants run on coal or gas or, in a few minor cases, solar, like that thing in, have you flown into Las Vegas? There's this giant solar field of solar panels, and it reflects. I mean, you can actually feel the heat through the walls of the airplane as you're flying in, and it's blinding like pilots almost because of the reflection of the sun. I mean, just imagine holding up, a couple thousand mirrors and focusing them. I mean, it's so. But anyway, so the global warming problem that most of the people on the left are concerned about, and this is going to bring down humanity. That's their version of the apocalypse. We all have an end times eschatology. It's just that some people believe it's global warming, some people believe it's geopolitics and religion and Jesus Christ returning. So in this Bitcoin, they're setting up these massive server farms, and a lot of times they're doing it where power is cheap or subsidized by the government, like in Saudi Arabia where oil and gas are cheap, or China where power is subsidized by the government. But what's happening is these server farms that they're setting up to conduct these calculations that are needed to qualify for Bitcoin to get a Bitcoin or get Bitcoins, are using a lot of power. Listen to what this was in Wired Magazine and a bunch of other places. In a report last week, the cryptocurrency website Digiteconomics said that worldwide Bitcoin mining was using more electricity than Serbia, the country. Writing for Grist, Eric Holthaus calculated that by July 2019, just a little over a year away, the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, remember BitTorrent, like that, would require more electricity than all of the United States to do this. And by November of 2020, it used more electricity than the entire world does today. Now, the Bitcoin people say, oh, don't worry, we'll get it figured out. Things will change. But it's always these things that come on the scene where everybody says, oh, this is great. This is going to get rid of, governments controlling currency and central banks and all this other stuff. There's a downside cost to this. And frankly, I will be honest with you, I still don't grasp the inner workings of Bitcoin. Okay, all I know is I wish I had bought a bunch of them back when they were really cheap. And then I would be doing this from Arizona or someplace. But you would think we would have a virtual, sort of a hologram of me. I would fund the laser hologram and everything. So let's talk about Jerusalem, Middle East, and that's what we'll talk about for the balance of everything today. A very important anniversary, and now this year, as we've gone through things, for example, Pam and I were in Israel in May, when on the Jewish calendar they celebrated the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. 50th anniversary, very significant. We just had the 70th anniversary on the Jewish calendar, a day or two, either the day or 2 days before President Trump made his announcement last week. And doesn't it seem like he made that announcement like a month ago already? I mean, really, this time, there's so much that happens that's compressed in a short amount of time now that it seems like a month, a week is a month, and a month is like a year. So that was the 70th anniversary of the UN Resolution 181, which said that we should establish, the world will recognize a Jewish state. But they also said we would recognize a Palestinian state. And the Jews agreed, the people behind the Jewish state agreed. The Arabs never have agreed. And there were even declarations before that from the British that, listen, as long as you Arabs can unite, we'll recognize the establishment of an Arab state. The key phrase there was, if you Arabs will unite. And as you can see from the last 6 years, now almost 7 years, of the Arab Spring, actually it started in Tunisia in December of 2010, so now 7 years of this Arab Spring, this conflict in mainly Arab countries, shows that reuniting Arabs is a very, very difficult task. So this week, though, on December 11th, last Monday, was the 100th anniversary of the day that General George Allenby of the army of the British Empire, entered Jerusalem, having defeated the Ottoman Turks in a number of battles, including one up at Megiddo and one down at Beersheba, where he was helped by people from New Zealand, contingent from New Zealand. And so there we were 100 years ago. This week, Allenby walked into Jerusalem. Now, he was accompanied there. Behind him were two guys named Sykes and Picot. We've talked a lot about them over the years, the Sykes-Picot Agreement that had been put in place in 1916, to talk about dividing up the Middle East between French, British, and Russian interests. And the most difficult one that they had was this topic of what to do with Jerusalem. But Jerusalem has long been the homeland, the capital of the Jewish people. At the UN Security Council a week ago, before I talked last Sunday, I just didn't have time to do this, the ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, had this to say about something that was found recently in Jerusalem.
I have here a replica of an ancient coin found on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It is dated from the year 67 AD, during the time of the Second Jewish Temple. The words Yerushalayim Akdosha, Jerusalem the Holy, are written on this coin. Only 3 years later, in the year 70 AD, would our holy temple be destroyed and the Jewish people sent into exile for 2,000 years. Nearly 70 years ago, this week, shortly after Israel declared independence, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion made a timeless affirmation. He said, and I quote, "Jerusalem is an inseparable part of Israel and their eternal capital. No United Nations vote can alter that historic fact." It was an important message, one that the world too often seems to forget. Last year, in this very same room, we were here, all of us, almost all of us. The Security Council passed the shameful resolution 2334. This council had the audacity, the chutzpah, to say that Israel's presence at the Western Wall in Jerusalem has, and I quote, no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. Then, in May 2017, UNESCO, the organization responsible for preserving cultural heritage, passed a resolution declaring that Israel has no legal or historical rights anywhere in Jerusalem. It was one historical wrong after another. That is why President Trump's decision was so important. The United States had the courage and the sound moral judgment to right these historic wrongs. They recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel.
And we did, and President Trump did a week ago, and there's been a lot of reaction to that. Even a lot of secular magazines, I mean, everybody's talking about Jerusalem. And it's interesting, the Bible says in the end that Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone, and everybody's talking about how unsolvable the problems are, and how do we divide Jerusalem, and what do we do with Jerusalem, and if it's not divided, we're going to have an explosion in the Arab and Muslim world. How do we get around this problem? And in the Atlantic this week, last week, Emma Green wrote this article. Jerusalem is not the explosive device; it's the detonator. This is the cover of the current Atlantic magazine. What Putin really wants. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get to that section of my update today. But listen to what Green says in this. It's usually the detonator. There's almost invariably one thing and one thing only that creates the spark, and that is the real or perceived threat to sacred space. When Jews all over the world pray, they face Israel. Those in Israel face Jerusalem, and those in Jerusalem face the Temple Mount, the site of Judaism's two ancient sanctuaries, which once stood on the same patch of land now occupied by the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. This is because we all believe this is our capital, said Arya King, a right-wing member of Jerusalem City Council. For the Orthodox Jew like me, Jerusalem is not a place to live. It's a way that you live. It's a place close to where everything important of our history happened, also in the future, where we believe the third temple will be built. This is what Palestinians in East Jerusalem will be watching for, said Zayed. How Trump's decision could affect the city's holiest mosque, where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad prayed before he was transported to heaven. If there is an announcement of Jerusalem and changing the status of Al-Aqsa, it will be hell, he said. The action of the people will be very furious. No one will coordinate this reaction, he said. It will be the people, he added. It will be the people. Spontaneously, you will feel the reaction from the people. Now, I will note that when the Arab Muslims, the Mufti controlled the Temple Mount after he was given control, the Mufti controlled the Temple Mount in the early days of the formation of the Jewish state. And in 1948, when the war happened and the Jordanians had the Mufti in place, the Mufti, who appears to be a relative, maybe an uncle of Yasser Arafat, said, you Jews, you can't even come to the Western Wall to pray. And so for 19 years, they were banned from the Western Wall. That's why there was such a outpouring of celebration. And they were kicked out of what's now the Jewish quarter of the Old City. Jewish tombstones were turned over and used as urinals by the Muslim authorities. And so they're the ones that get all fired up when anybody talks about changing status. They're the ones who've changed the status almost most consistently. Another article in The Atlantic is written by Gary Burge. Gary Burge used to be a professor of New Testament at Wheaton College. He's now a professor emeritus there, and he's teaching at Calvin College and Calvin Seminary. And he is a person that does not support the evangelical Bible prophecy-related interpretation of the scriptures with regard to the importance of Israel and Jerusalem to the Jewish people. And so here's some of the things that he said in his article. And he spoke at the first Christ at the Checkpoint conference back in, I think it was in 2010. There's one coming up here in 2018. Some conservative evangelicals have built a remarkable theology around the modern state of Israel. It's as if a biblical story has come alive again from the scriptures. In the Hebrew Bible, Jerusalem was, by the way, you can look through the Quran and you will never find the word Jerusalem. Mentioned over roughly around 800 times in the Old Testament and New Testament. In the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, Jerusalem was established as Israel's capital by King David about 1,000 years before Christ. Notwithstanding various wars and a Babylonian exile that led to the loss of the city, Jerusalem remained Israel's de facto capital in the Jewish imagination. Even in the New Testament, Jerusalem is assumed to be Israel's capital. But another war in 70 AD led to a long-time loss. Modern Israel did not recapture Jerusalem until 1967. Moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is simply provocative. And this is a part of the world where the peace process requires us to avoid provocation at all costs. Yeah, like the other side of the coin here is avoiding provocation at all costs. There's a reason why the world's embassies have stayed out of Jerusalem. It's not based on anti-Israel antagonism. Baloney. You know, how does... This is a guy who got tenure as a professor at supposedly the evangelical Harvard. So, you know, it's when you read a statement like this that's so supremely disconnected from reality and facts and history, the question you always want to ask this person is, where did you get your PhD? Because they've had to have the, you know, common sense beat out of them. It's not based on anti-Israel antagonism. It's a pragmatic decision to support the peace process and to view Jerusalem as a shared city that respects everyone's privileges. And I will tell you, when Pam and I were there, the times we've been there, we pretty much had free reign to walk around wherever we wanted. Now, there was an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood right next to where we were staying, and you didn't walk around there on Shabbat, okay? Because if you could walk with them down to the Temple Mount, and they would come down the street walking to the Temple Mount. But if you walked in there, or like jogged through there, they would throw rocks at you. I mean, that's just the way it is. Bird says, I've had career diplomats in the State Department tell me privately that an embassy move would be foolish. Unfortunately, many of these seasoned men and women are leaving their careers or being pushed out. We need people like them to now remind the White House that the Middle East, even symbolic gestures, can have very real dangerous consequences. But we also need evangelicals to do this. Trump listens to his evangelical advisors, and they are the ones that can lead him back to the Hebrew prophets where a different point of view can be found. And I could cite you passage after passage, Hebrew, Zechariah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, about the importance of Jerusalem, Daniel. So, again, he's had this view of the scriptures educated out of him. Very sad. Well, the EU is coming about right now, trying to get involved, and everybody wants to get involved in the peace process, and everybody's upset, and everybody wants to get involved now because Trump said something that has got them upset. So one of the people is Emmanuel Macron. He came, he did an interview. There was a big summit in Israel. I played, I think, a short clip of he and Netanyahu meeting the press last week. And, you know, I follow these meetings of heads of state each week, and it's like, who's flying these guys around all the time? I mean, talk about causing global warming. Their jets are going 24/7. I mean, they're just racking up the frequent flyer miles. Of course, they're not flying commercial or coach, but one of these is Emmanuel Macron, and he gave an interview to CBS last week. Here's a little bit about what he had to say about Trump's proclamation regarding Jerusalem.
You talked about Jerusalem.
Yes, exactly.
Before.
Yes.
And he said what?
He said that probably he will announce the fact that he wanted to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and transfer the American services in Jerusalem.
And you told him what?
I told him I thought it was a mistake. I told him I thought that the issue is not this one. I told him that it's not compliant with the international rules because we decided internationally that it's not the case. Why? Because we've worked all together on the recognition of two states, Israel and Palestine, with borders recognized by the international community, and that such a unilateral decision is not compliant with our international discussions and our international rules, and will not facilitate a peace process because that's a unilateral decision, and that's pretty much humiliating for the Palestinian side.
In your estimation, does it jeopardize the peace process?
I think, first of all, I do call for peace and calm. And you saw some reactions and very aggressive reactions, first of all against Israel. And I'm a strong ally of Israel, and we're very much concerned by peace and security for Israel. So I have this call for peace and calm because I don't want that The potential consequences of this announcement could be to jeopardize the security of Israel because of the reaction of some people in the region. Second, I'm very careful about the reaction in the whole region, in Lebanon, in Israel and Palestine, in Jordan, in all these different countries where you have a lot of Palestinian refugees and where this, obviously, this situation is very sensitive. So my first obsession, I would say, and my first concern is to preserve peace and calm in the whole region. Second, and I think if we have any excess and if we have victims or big trouble, it could jeopardize for a pretty long time any peace process or any initiative. Second, I think we have to discuss with all the parties and try to find a way out. But obviously the reaction of the Palestinians will not be very positive. They are not in the good mood to progress towards any peace process.
Well, that was Macron. Other people weighed in on this. This is a publication from the Muslim Brotherhood. To the left of it, you can imagine what they say is the translation of this. By the way, if you don't use it, Google Translate is very good for translating foreign text. Just copy it and paste it into the box. It detects the language. It's fantastic. I mean, and it's pretty accurate. In the name of Allah the Merciful, we are for the victory of our messengers and for those who believe in this life. Down. The Muslim Brotherhood has followed the U.S. President's statements about his intention to transfer the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem in recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the state of the Zionist entity. That's called Israel. A decision that entered into force is a formal attack by the United States on the lands and Islamic sanctities. The Muslim Brotherhood affirms that the American president's move to put America and all its interests in all countries of the world under the same political position of the interests of the Zionist entity and will turn into an enemy state of the Arab and Islamic world with its intentional, institutional, political, and popular components. The American president has exploited the weakness of the Muslim world at present and the ability of tyrannical regimes to strike deadly blows to the Arab Spring and decided to support the Zionist lobby, to support the Zionist project on the Palestinian territories. But he should know that his decision represents his state of classification as a state sponsor of the occupation, a country hostile to all freedom in various parts of the world. In case you don't understand what that says, they're against it. So a group of professors got together and put out this Jewish Studies Statement on Jerusalem Declaration. So in it, it says here, in the third paragraph down, as the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem has documented, Palestinian residents of Jerusalem endure systemic inequalities, including an inequitable distribution of the city's budget and municipal services, routine denial of building permits that are granted to Jewish residents, home demolitions, and legal confiscation of property for Jewish settlements. In addition, Palestinians in the West Bank, unlike Jewish Israelis resident in that territory, require a special permit to visit Jerusalem's holy sites. There's a reason for that. But what I appreciate is that if you want to find out all the professors that have a complete misunderstanding of what's going on, the last I saw had been signed by about 140 mainly tenured professors at Harvard and other major universities around the country. So you can look that up online, Jewish Studies Statement on Jerusalem Declaration, and you can find out where not to send your kid. That's a good start. So Netanyahu this week went to the European Council. He was in Brussels. It was the first time in 22 years that an Israeli prime minister had really gone to an official European meeting. It's fairly significant that it's been a long time since that happened. So he met here, and I'm not going to try her name. This is the EU foreign minister, foreign policy chief, and Mogherini. And this is what she said and Trump had to say in response. This is just, or not Trump, Netanyahu had to say in response.
You know where the European Union stands. We believe that the only realistic solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine is based on two states, with Jerusalem as the capital of both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine along the 67 line. This is our consolidated position, and we will continue to respect the international consensus on Jerusalem until the final status of the Holy City is resolved through direct negotiations between the parties, and we hope that the parties can engage in meaningful direct negotiations with the support of the international community. Let me also say that the worst thing that can happen now is an escalation of tensions or violence, first of all around the holy places, but also in the region and beyond. Let me condemn in the strongest possible way all attacks on Jews everywhere in the world, including in Europe, and on Israel and on Israeli citizens.
You see that in the continuous denial unfortunately, by the Palestinians of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, and the denial of our history. For 3,000 years, Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people. From the time established by King David, well documented in the history of the Bible and the aftermath. When Jews in the ghettos of Europe whispered, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. We never lost our connection. Yet that connection is denied in UN forums and UNESCO and laughable decisions that seek to deny history and seek to deny historical truth. Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for the last 70 years. I think what President Trump has done is put facts squarely on the table. Peace is based on reality. Peace is based on recognizing reality. And I think the fact that Jerusalem's capital, Jerusalem is Israel's capital, is clearly evident to all of you who visit Israel. See where the seat of our parliament, our Knesset is, the seat of our government, my office, the president's office, the Supreme Court. Jerusalem is Israel's capital. No one can deny it. It doesn't obviate peace. It makes peace possible, because recognizing reality is the substance of peace. It's the foundation of peace. There is now an effort underway to bring forward a new peace proposal by the American administration. I think we should give peace a chance. I think we should see what is presented and see if we can advance this peace. But if we have to begin it, I would say it's one place. Recognize the Jewish state. It's always been about the Jewish state. And it's time that the Palestinians recognize the Jewish state and also recognize the fact that it has a capital. It's called Jerusalem.
Okay. So the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a collection of 57 Muslim states. I've often thought, remember when President Obama made the mistake and he said, you know, I've been to all 57 states or something like that. And there is an organization that has 57 states. It doesn't happen to be the United States of America, but there is one that has 57. So maybe it was a slip of the tongue. I don't know. So the IOC is renowned, got together this week. They had a meeting in Istanbul. They had representatives from all 57 countries show up. About half the countries sent their head of state, their leader, to the meeting. Some countries sort of stayed on the sidelines, sent a delegation of minor people, mainly Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And they got together and they claim, Jerusalem should be the capital. There's a Palestinian capital. You saw Mahmoud Abbas was there, even though, he was told by the Saudis, don't you dare, you need to accept this peace proposal that's coming. Of course, Erdogan, who fashions himself as a caliph, a sultan, the new head of the Ottoman Empire, who's going to revive the Ottoman Empire. And it's interesting, you see what the title is there, the extraordinary summit that they had in Istanbul. So maybe we should call this the Extraordinary Prophecy Update or something like that. Maybe, I don't think any heads of state would come, and the other thing I noted, for point of fact, I'm a fairly tall person. President Erdogan, I did a little background on him. He's 6 foot tall, by the way, and he looks like a giant in that picture, which is sort of how I'm a little over 6'3", so that's how I feel when I'm in Israel. I feel like I'm looking over everybody's. I can get in a crowd and I can see all the way to the front, even when everybody's standing up. So I think the other people there are a little bit shorter. And by the way, I am 2 days older than President Erdogan. He was born 2 days after I was, in the same year, by the way. So they had this meeting. They got together. They talked. They had this confab. You saw the people that were there. There was Rouhani from Iran, which I think is significant. Sunni, Shia split, but when it comes to the Jewish state of Israel, or as they call it, the Zionist entity, they will get together. There were some other interesting, of course, Mahmoud Abbas in the lower right was there, meeting with Erdogan. Above that is the guy from Sudan, Bashir, who's wanted by the International Criminal Court, and he seems to be flying all. He was in Jordan recently, and he was in Istanbul this week. And then this guy in the lower left, you know who that is? This is outside the, I think it's a 900-room palace that Erdogan had built for himself. It costs like $500 million or something that he lives in. You never know when you're going to need 400 bathrooms and that type of thing. So this is Maduro, the head of Venezuela, who showed up at this meeting. And so when people like Trevor Loudon and Claudia Rosette and other people, a lot of them associated with the Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney's group, when they talk about the Red-Green Alliance, you need to pay attention to the Red-Green Alliance, the Communist Socialist Alliance with Islam, because it's very important and it's a factor that's often overlooked. And I was kind of shocked to see Maduro there, even in some of these photographs. I think he's cut off. He would be to Rouhani's right over on that side in the group photos. And then this was Erdogan was talking, and even Erdogan's using PowerPoint now, and President Erdogan, you need to leave that to the professionals, but it's like he downloaded some of my slides, and he even had a little laser pointer that he was using to move around. By the way, the PowerPoint finally put a little laser pointer thing within PowerPoint that I can move around with my mouse. So at the risk of making you all sick, I'll try not to use it too often. So you're getting sleepy. We can even use that for the songs in the worship service. We follow the bouncing ball. So, by the way, he's Muslim, so he used a green laser for his presentation. So here's he talking. He talked about the fact that that the country, everybody needs to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. They're going to try to put an embassy. They've announced putting an embassy in East Jerusalem. Israel's not going to let it happen. It's just not going to happen. Even the guy from Afghanistan was there, and here's what he had to say.
We're meeting in a unique historical moment when the attention of the Ummah in the world alike is focused on Al-Quds, Haram al-Sharif, and the right of the Palestinian people. The consensus within the Ummah is heartwarming, as the streets in states, mosques in media, people and leaders, men and women, young and old, are speaking in a unified voice. Al-Quds, as our first Qibla in Haram al-Sharif, as our third holy mosque, are at the core of our identity as Muslims, in key symbols of our Islamic civilization. The heart of every Afghan beats in sympathy and empathy with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Equally gratifying is the international affirmation of UN resolutions on the need for a just and enduring solution that would ensure the rights of the Palestinian people to statehood and settle the status of Al-Quds. The alignment and accord between the Muslim world and the world at large has never been this great and is a tribute to the special place of Al-Quds in the history of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism.
Well, it really didn't have any connection with it. Well, Islam didn't start until, around 630 AD, and they did build that Dome of the Rock around 691 AD. But it had a much longer history of Christianity and Judaism, much longer before that. But it's interesting what he said. I mean, he's the head of the Pakistan or Afghanistan. The head of Pakistan was there. I saw people from Malaysia, Indonesia. They were all there to do this. The king of Saudi Arabia sent a minor delegation, but sent this video.
The kingdom incessantly calls for political solutions to the crises and problems in the region, and first and foremost to the Palestinian issue, with the restoration of the Palestinian people's legitimate rights. This includes the right to proclaim an independent state, of which East Jerusalem is the capital.
And Mahmoud Abbas, you see him there, he was there, he also spoke. And he just essentially said, look, we don't have to listen to the United States anymore. They're no longer the broker for peace. They've ruined it by declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. One interesting thing about what the leader of Afghanistan said, our first Qibla, which is a part of the mosque, and the orientation of the mosque, just like the orientation of the Torah Ark in synagogues is towards the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, with exception of some early first century synagogues that were used by the church in Jerusalem that point to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Qibla is supposed to point towards where? Mecca. The problem is that the early mosques almost universally do not point towards Mecca. The one in Jerusalem, and I've done this, I've gotten a map out and done the coordinates and oriented it. And there's a big mosque up at Baalbek and other places in Syria. The early mosques all point not to Mecca, but point to where? Petra. There's a great talk. I don't have time to go into it. Jay Smith did a great talk at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. You can go to calvarycch.org. And you go to their media center and you can do a search under Jay Smith. And I think he did it 3 or 4 years ago. It was a great talk, and he went through all the details of all these mosques that point to Petra and not Mecca. So they came out with a communique, they came out with a declaration. In their declaration, they said, stressing the importance of protecting the multicultural, multi-religious character of Al-Quds, where the sacred places of three monotheistic religions stand side by side as a historical consequence of the philosophy of tolerance inherent in Islam, a religion of moderation and peaceful coexistence. Now, I just encourage you, if you really believe that they mean that, go up to the Temple Mount. We played the Jeremy Gimpel, who's been here to talk. Went up there to pray, and what happened? He got arrested. You'll get arrested if you go up there to pray. If you bow your head, if you hold your wife's hand, you're out of there. They also came out with a communique from this conference. It has a lot of things in there that they want to reject what Trump did. They condemn it. They reaffirm the centrality of the cause of Palestinian and Al-Quds al-Sharif to the Muslim Ummah. By the way, in the 1920s, the Mufti of Jerusalem put out sort of a tourist guide to Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount area, and said this is where Solomon's temple had stood. And now they deny that there's any connection at all, and UNESCO denies them. Just like, read their own documents. So they go through, this is a dangerous declaration. Finding 6 or point 6 here, hold the U.S. administration fully liable for all the consequences of not retracting this illegal decision and regard it as an announcement of the U.S. administration's withdrawal of its role as sponsor of peace and its realization among all stakeholders. It's exactly what you would think. So the result of this was, now listen, the predictions were, oh, the Muslim world's going to be aflame, everything's going to happen. I mentioned last week that a lot of the protests had this kind of rent-a-mob look to them, like, you know, they wait for the media to come. And I was told by somebody who's been to Israel many, many times that they have to get their satellite uplink like arranged the day before. So they arrange their satellite uplink, they call the media and say, you know, there'll be a spontaneous demonstration tomorrow at noon in such and such a place. And Pam and I, we saw this a little bit when we were traveling around. We were down in Hebron one day, and then we were going up to Nablus. This is a picture of what's going on in Nablus yesterday. And they're burning tires, they were burning cars and that type of thing. And so we were in Hebron and everything was peaceful. And then we went up to Nablus the next day and we could see where the tires had been burning the day before and the thing. But then that day, the rent-a-mob went down to Hebron and they were protesting in Hebron that day. So they were, and then, you know, they were in Jericho after we were in Jericho. So they were kind of, I don't know, following us around in some respects. So they do this, and listen, this is what it looked like when we were there back in May, because they were upset about President Trump coming and going to the Western Wall. They're upset now. They're going to be upset this week that Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, first Vice President in U.S. history to do this, is going to go to Jerusalem. I think he landed there today, and he'll be going to the Wailing Wall, and they're going to be upset about this, and you're going to see more pictures of this, and some will be in Hebron, and some will be in Nablus, and you'll see some over here outside of East Jerusalem, and it just happens. There have been 4 killed so far, a lot injured. This is an interesting headline, though. Al Jazeera coverage of Trump's Jerusalem move promoting hatred. That comes from the Arab News, which is the Saudi Arabian English newspaper. And they don't like Qatar because Qatar is why? They're tied to Iran, because Qatar and Iran have a joint gas field that they use that they get a lot of money from. And so there's tension between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. We know this has been going on. They've been cutting off relations. And so the Saudi newspaper took the opportunity to point out this fact. Erdogan said that, you know, the Muslim nations are going to seek a UN annulment of Trump's Jerusalem move. And in fact, in that communique that I was referencing earlier that came out of the OIC meeting, they do say here, paragraph 13, call on the UN Security Council to assume its responsibilities immediately and reaffirm the legal status of the city of Al-Quds al-Sharif and to end the Israeli occupation of land of the state of Palestine, to ensure the international protection of the Palestinian people and to implement and respect all resolutions on the Palestinian cause. Now, what's probably going to happen is the U.S. will do what they have done in every case in the past, with one exception, which was Resolution 2334 that came at the end of the Obama administration. Samantha Powers and the Obama administration refused to veto that resolution when it came to the UN. That was a year ago this month. And now they're investigating the Trump administration people, because in the transition between the election and Trump being sworn in January, there were calls made to people on behalf by the Trump administration to get the UN to either drop the resolution or to get other countries to veto the resolution, because they didn't want it to affect what they were going to do in U.S. policy the following month. So now that, supposedly that they say this violates the Logan Act. Now, no, I don't think anybody maybe has been prosecuted under the Logan Act for 200 years or more. You're not supposed to, private citizens not supposed to get involved in foreign policy. That's a violation of the Logan Act. And I would suggest that if they're going to prosecute anybody in the incoming Trump administration who's trying to get a government in place, that one person they could prosecute under the Logan Act would be Obama, who's running around all over the world conducting his own foreign policy. So let's, the hypocrisy in, there's a reason they call it a swamp. It's a swamp of hypocrisy and immorality and other things there. It's just, it's amazing. Here was the headline from this morning's Jerusalem Post. Top Trump official, U.S. envisions the Kotel, that's the Western Wall Plaza, as being part of Israel. Boy, and the Palestinians are going to be really upset about that. That's going to make the Pence visit even a little bit more. Other things going on in the Middle East, Nikki Haley came out and displayed Iranian hardware to the press that they found in Yemen. This is a view, I should play you some videos that I found of the city of Raqqa that they're trying to figure out. Nobody can go in there because the ISIS fighters on their way out booby-trapped everything. They put mines in place, and it's not safe for anybody to go there. And they say it's going to be years before anybody can go into Raqqa. And this is also true in large sections of Mosul. There are no-go zones. Nobody can go there, and nobody wants to go in there to rebuild it. And I mean, it's everything in the city looks like this, just piles of rubble. It's like that in Mosul. It's like that in Damascus. It's like that in Aleppo, all over that area of the Middle East. Now, there's a lot of tension and a lot of talk about, is there a world war coming? I'm increasingly of the view that something is going on, and I will confess to you, I'm very concerned. The U.S. military state of readiness is not very good. It doesn't mean we don't have good people in the military. It's just that we have let things deteriorate in our military. And things are happening. For example, China wants to take over the sea lanes of the South China Sea, where over half of the world's commerce passes through there. And so they've been building these islands. This is an island that they built. It looks like a giant aircraft carrier is what it looks like. This is an island that China built. Now, it would appear that the purpose of that island has something to do with airplanes more than anything else. And they've done this throughout the South China Sea, and they've told Australia, don't you dare come in here. Europe at the same time is having problems. There's Germany. This is an article from the Financial Times. Germany fears reemergence of anti-Semitism. We have Macron and Merkel. Angela, be careful. He has a thing for older women. This thing. And this is interesting because there's this immigration problem is a huge problem in Europe, Muslim immigration. This is a survey. Is immigration positive or negative for the country? And look here, you're looking at like 75% of Italy says yes, over 60% Austria, France, Germany is around 50%, the UK is around 40%. Are you worried about Islam? Look at those numbers all the way up to around 50% to 70% in the major European powers. Do you trust government? I mean, there seems to be a correlation between all of those. And the Gatestone Institute has a good article that just came out on Friday. Soren Kern, who I've seen speaking at some prophecy and other conferences here in the United States, about the Pew projection came out, and they've really undercounted the number of Muslims in Europe. They come out to a conclusion that it's somewhere around 5%. I don't have time to talk about that, but you can see France is 8.8%. You can probably add a couple, 3 percentage points to each of those. That would put Germany up close to 10%. And they always say that, when Islam comes in to take over a culture that way, that it is 10% is sort of the tipping point. When they get to 10%, they can control things. And I've been reading stories of, like, in a week, there were a dozen bombing attacks, firebombing or other bombing attacks in Sweden. The Nordic, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Sweden has become a very dangerous place. Now, they'll deny it, but the facts seem to, and people like the Gatestone Institute are putting out good words about that. And as I said, when this immigration thing was happening over the last couple of years, I said it used to be in the past, and you'll see a picture like the one there of the sort of the immigrants behind the top picture there on the left of Merkel and Macron, that the 85% of those immigrants in that period of time, they don't even, by the way, the Pew Foundation doesn't even count 1 or 2 million of those immigrants that are in Germany right now, because they haven't been formally granted asylum. So they're just sort of but they're there. And they're about 85% or more military-age male. And as I said, I think you might remember I said this, and maybe nobody remembers what I said, but I don't even remember what I said. But it used to be that in the past, it was traditional for invading armies to provide their own transportation. This invasion is different in that they're not only transporting them to the front lines, but they're giving them welfare when they get there, which seems to be, and so the reason that this is important, I think, in a Bible prophecy standpoint, is Europe in many respects is collapsing. How they come out of that, I don't know. They could reunite. I don't know that they will. If the Lord delays his coming, arguments about Islamic Antichrist, maybe an Islamic Antichrist that comes from Europe. You know, and I disagree with my friends that say that Ezekiel 38 war will get rid of Islam or completely crush it. Personally, I just don't see that. The army that comes, the mighty army, we don't know how big that will be crushed. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And it'll be a devastating defeat, but I don't know that that's going to stop that. I do know that there's prophecies about the Arab states and prophecies. There's prophecies about what happens to them during that end period of history. So, and the interesting thing about that is the demographic issues that are facing the world, the West, population collapse, aging populations, that sort of thing, all seem to me to indicate to be another factor that this is means things are going to happen in the near future in terms of Bible prophecy, because cultures are going to disappear in a generation, and everything seems to be set up now. This is an interesting thing to watch. The Aramco, the Saudi Arabian government-controlled oil company, is going to do an IPO. It will be their goal is to have the company reach a $2 trillion valuation when it's done. That's a big game changer in the world of finance. When that's going to be done or not is anybody's guess. But here's an interesting thing, and I'll kind of finish up with this if you give me just 5 or 10 minutes. Europe is heavily dependent on gas, natural gas for heat. If you've been to Europe, you know that in the winter, Europe can get very cold because it's further north than we are here. So they need gas. Well, what's happened here over the last week is that there have been 3 major incidents that have interrupted the gas flow. First, there was a accident at the big field in Norway, which is the largest European-owned field. There was also a pipeline that needs to be replaced in the North Sea that's resulted in that being shut down. And then this explosion took place at a major transit hub for the gas coming from Russia through Austria that supplies all of the gas for Austria and Italy. Italy's declared a state of emergency. This is going to be shut down for a long time, and Europe is in trouble when it comes. There's a gas shortage. You can see from the Financial Times article, this graph right here. This is the price of gas, and this is what happened last week. It like doubled, more than doubled in a couple days because of this problem. So one of the things that happened this week is that early in the week, Vladimir Putin, he went on a tour. His first stop was in Syria. He went to Latakia, to the air base there that the Russians have put in place. It's one of the reasons they wanted to be there. And he went and he had a meeting, and he came in there and he declared that we've defeated ISIS and there's going to be a partial withdrawal of our troops. Now, what that means exactly is anybody's guess. We don't know exactly what it means. The Pentagon has expressed some concern about this. And I apologize, I forgot to put it in. I downloaded it, but I got too busy and I forgot. You can find it on the internet. When they were walking, Putin and Assad were walking over to where the podium where Putin was going to give his speech. The Russian military advisors grabbed the arm of Assad and essentially said, "You can't go up to the podium with him." It was a stunning thing to watch that the head of state was stopped by the military of Russia in his own country from going to the podium. This shows that Putin has a very focused plan to build up Russia and to build up himself. And I'll tell you why that might be important. After he left Syria, he went down to Egypt and he met with al-Sisi, the head of Egypt, and signed a big gas deal with Egypt. Now that might be significant, and there's also a lot of belief that there's oil and gas that's either transiting through Syria or is available in Syria. I know we saw a drilling rig up in the Golan Heights when we were there back in May. There's a belief that there's a lot of oil there. Then he went from there, he went to Ankara to meet with Erdogan. And this is the third time they've met in less than a month. Now, when we talk about the Ezekiel 38-39 alliance, what do we talk about? We talk about Russia, Turkey, Iran. This week you saw all of them together in one fashion or another. And so here was a meeting, he was welcome there at the presidential palace, Erdogan's cottage there in Ankara, 900-room cottage. And they had a joint statement. And one of the things they talked about in the joint statement was Trump's thing, what Trump did with Jerusalem. And boy, we just can't have that. Trump made a big mistake, and I'm all about peace in the Middle East. Now, what came out late this week was the Newsweek cover with Putin on it, and a large article in it called, "Putin is Preparing for World War III. Yeah, that's bad news." And so it has a very extensive article about all the things that Putin is putting into place to bring about World War III if he can. Hang on here. So that's where I want to end. Look, our military state of readiness is very bad right now. They have 3 times as many nuclear missiles, Russia does, as we do. Theirs are more modern than ours are. A lot of ours are still 60s technology. And President Trump wants to upgrade that, but it takes time. You don't just put out an aircraft carrier like you put out a Ford Escort or something like that. It just doesn't happen that quickly. It's a big problem. And Putin really seems to be pushing the world that way. And a lot of the foreign policy people are talking about that, and it's a big concern. I think it does play into Bible prophecy. Listen, the title of this today was "When You See," right? Jesus talked about that there would be earthquakes, wars, rumors of wars. We see the fires are still burning. I mean, do you even hear about the fires in Southern California? Not that much. They're still burning. Huge amounts of Southern California is still on fire. The air quality is terrible. They were evacuating places in Santa Barbara yesterday, is my understanding. And you're just not hearing that much about it because everybody's moved on. Somebody I talked to as a friend in Southern California, and they said the Santa Ana winds right now are, what was the term they used? Unprecedented. I hear this all the time. This is an unprecedented storm. This is an unprecedented that, an unprecedented that. And Jesus told us that when you see these things, it's not the end yet, but you really need to pay attention. And that's why we do this every week. So Take that in mind, keep that in mind, and it should cause you to live your life in a much better fashion. I mean, things could change very quickly. And it's like I said, I watch a lot of news. I read a lot. I read intelligence journals and that type of thing. And the thing I see all the time is, this is unprecedented. We've never seen this before. We've never seen this alignment before. Well, I would suggest that if you've been reading the Bible seriously, not like Gary Burge does. By the way, go to JerusalemJournal.net. Our friend Brian Schrager posted an article this week by Dexter Van Zyl that responds to Gary Burge. And Dexter's I think he's gracious in a way. He doesn't say that Gary's unsaved or anything like that. He just says he has a very different, messed up view of what the Bible teaches about Israel and end times and that sort of thing. But go read that article by Dexter Van Zyl. I can't remember the title off my head. Also, go to Jerusalem Journal. Support Brian if you can. He can use the support. I think what he does is important. There are other people that do similar ministries that you can support as well. So let's pray. Let's keep in mind that, when you see these things, pay attention. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Father, I just pray that you'll watch over us this week and be with us. Keep us true to our faith, committed to your word, and committed to sharing the testimony of the fabulous grace of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.